All right, I'm excited for yet another day of amazing piñata making, you guys. It's going to be great. Today, we're really going to get the structure together. The first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that this bad boy is plugged in. I know your hot glue gun might look a little different than mine. That's okay. As long as it's a hot glue gun, it's going to work. So we'll want that plugged in because it takes a few minutes to warm up. So kind of picking up from where we left off last class, we want to make sure that we've got a bunch of strips of cardboard that are going to be the sides, right? It's going to give us the depth of our piñata. And we need to make sure that it's all the same. So, you know, making sure you're using a straight edge, whether you cut it with a scissors or X-Acto knife, either way is fine. Just if you use an X-Acto knife, be extra careful and always put some cardboard underneath on your surface so you're not getting scratches and cuts into your work area. But making sure, you know, draw some lines and make sure it's the same thickness the whole way through. Like right now I'm noticing that it's only about 1/4 of an inch more here, but I would need to make sure to cut that a little bit straighter so that my piñata lines up and matches evenly. So we're going to want a bunch of strips like this, making sure that it's going to be enough to go all the way around. And even if one strip doesn't make it all the way around, which it never does, that's okay. This is why we're cutting multiple strips. You can kind of see here, this is where one strip ended and I just started with another one. Okay, so once we're kind of ready to go, we've got all of our strips cut out. They're all the same thickness to them. I want to make sure that I'm getting rid of the rigidity in my cardboard, because, you know, right now it's pretty rigid. So I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to use my fingers. Now be careful. Paper cuts hurt. Cardboard paper cuts, the worst. Like, seriously, terrible pain. So be careful with this step. You don't want to hurt ourselves. But I'm just kind of like breaking the rigidity of it, okay? Making sure that it's nice and loose so that when I start trying to make some of these turns and curves and angles around my piñata, that it's able to more easily do so. So I'm just kind of going like this here with that. And you can even go in both directions too to make sure it's really pliable. Okay, so now you can see it moves a lot easier, and that's what we want. The next thing I want to also make sure that we're all doing is thinking about where, tuck that in here, where the bottom, let me get this one actually, where the bottom of our piñata is going to be. Because if you're planning on actually using your piñata, we gotta make a hole for the candy to go in, right? So I'm planning on hanging mine from the top this way, which would make this portion the bottom. So when I started to like figure out where that bottom would be, I kind of like held the cardboard in place. I was like, okay, so the bottom's gonna be there. You wanna make sure that you cut a hole. Save this, because once the candy's in, we're going to want to use some tape to reattach that to hold the candy in. But we want to make sure that we definitely have a hole ready to go, because it's going to be really hard to cut in after it's all built. So easier to do that now when I can just take and cut it like this and then attach. So thinking about that as well. As far as attaching it then, I like to use masking tape at first. Now you don't have to, but I just think it makes life a little bit easier since I only have 2 hands. It just kind of helps to hold it. So I'm taking my cardboard and I'm just sort of lining it up, and then I'm using the tape to hold it in place. I'm not worried that this looks a little ugly because we're going to be covering it up anyway, right? We're going to be putting tissue paper over the top of it, so it's not too big of a deal. I'm just going to kind of hold that all into place, and I need to measure out how far down this needs to go. This is where, sorry, it's hard to see that on camera. This is where having it nice and broken in versus super rigid is going to come into play, because making that little curve would have been really hard to do. So here's where I want to cut it. Let me double check that. Measure twice, cut once, as they say, right? So right here, I'll maybe even make a little snip in there just so I don't lose that spot. didn't take it out. There we go. So that's where I'm going to want to cut this because we're getting to the end. There we go. Okay, so once again, I'm going to take that tape and just kind of help hold everything into place here. Thank you, tape, for helping me. Okay, so now we want to make sure that the inside, especially on this back part of it, is going to be nice and strong because we have to hold candy in there, right? So I'm going to take my hot glue and run it along those edges and put in a decent amount. Now careful, I did just have a little hot glue leak through that tiny seam, and that can hurt a little bit. I mean, not me, because my fingers have basically lost all feeling at this point, right? Like, I've done metals and glass cutting and all kinds of art projects at this point. Not a lot of nerves left in my fingers, so, although I did still feel the hot glue, so there is that. But be careful, I don't want anyone getting hurt. All right, so I've just hot glued that inner edge. I do like to hold it for a little bit, you guys. Hot glue dries super fast. But you know, holding it for like a good 30 seconds or so, just to make sure it's cooled down enough that it's not going to pull away when you let go. I also need to make sure that I'm gluing those two pieces together. So I'm going to do that next as well. Sorry, this is going to be hard to see on camera, but getting those two pieces so that everything is nice and solid and the candy is going to stay put until it gets battered anyway. Then the candy comes out. All right, holding that a few seconds as well. Do not try that at home. Sometimes I like to smooth out the hot glue, and it's kind of fun to pick it off my skin. But it's hot, so be careful, because you probably have more feelings in your fingers than I do. All right, so now I've got the bottom part all ready to go. Our goal, let's see, is that one? I'm going to hold that a little bit longer. It seems like it's still a little too warm. It's not quite holding. Maybe give it a little extra layer too. So I always kind of do a litmus test there and see if it's moving. If it's moving, hold it a little bit longer. Okay. But the next step, because my goal is to have this completely put together before next class. So the next step is going to be to glue the top on. Now, the problem is I'm not going to be able to glue the top on from the inside, right? Because, well, there's no way to get in there anymore. So the top piece I'm going to have to hot glue from the outside. It's not going to be quite as strong, but hopefully if we made this back part nice and strong, and then we can use tape to kind of reinforce it as well, it should do the trick. It should be fine. Plus, we don't want this to be so strong that the candy actually never comes out. Like, we gotta make sure it's got a little bit of give to it, right? So what I'm gonna do now, I'm putting this on up here. I'm just gonna hold it in place, and I'm gonna go very slowly with this part. I'm gonna do a little section at a time. So there we go. Got that on there. And now I'm going to hold that in place until I can tell that it's dried enough and cool enough that it's going to hold and it's going to stay. So I'm going to kind of tack it down in a few spots around the top, and then once I've got it tacked down and kind of stable, that's when I'm going to go around the whole thing and get it all glued down from the outer edges. And then I'm also going to just use a little bit of masking tape to reinforce it at the end too, and give it, like I said, just a little extra strength. We don't want the first person hitting the piñata to break it open. Or maybe you do. Maybe you want your candy right away. All right, let's see, is that holding? Yeah, that seems like it's holding pretty well. So now I'm going to move over a little bit. And I'm going to put a little bit of hot glue here. Like I said, this first round, I'm just kind of tacking it down, and I'll go all the way around once it's kind of held into place really well. Oopsies. Gotta try not to move too much. So there we go. So I am not going to make you guys watch me do this the whole way around. You can kind of see what I'm doing. I'm going to go here. Maybe I'll glue here next. Bring it together and hold it over here, there. And then once I've got it all like held tight, That's when I'm going to go around the whole thing with my hot glue. And then, see, is that cool enough? Then once I'm done with that, I would go around with pieces of tape and go right over where I just glued, kind of like this, and help hold it in place that way. And I'm not worried about the fact that that doesn't look pretty, because tomorrow we're covering it up anyway. So that's your next step. Our goal is going to be that for next class, we've got the entire thing glued down, ready to go, nice and solid so that we can decorate it. Woo! All right, we'll see you guys then. Have a great rest of your day.